Hi, everyone. Welcome to our channel. Douglas Macgregor asserts that the defensive phase of Russian operations is nearing its end. Strategically, he laments that the Ukrainians have essentially played into the hands of the Russians by launching futile attacks against impenetrable defenses. Macgregor highlights a lack of understanding in the West regarding the critical connection between intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and firepower, a concept he believes the Russians grasp better than anyone. According to him, President Putin recently mentioned that Ukrainian casualties exceeded 13,000 killed, though other sources claim the number to be at least 15,000 with numerous wounded. Gregor predicts that history will judge the Ukrainian army's fate based on the recent operations from Bakhmut to the counteroffensive. Well, he acknowledges that the Ukrainian forces never breached the main defensive line as intended. Instead, they ventured into the security zone, a strategic area chosen by the Russians to dismantle the opposing force before it reaches the main defense. Well, that this phase is concluded, the question rises: what comes next? He believes the Ukrainians possess some degree of precision fire capability, but he doubts they have the same level of synchronized firepower linked to real-time aerial surveillance. This means the ability to identify and strike a target within minutes, a rapid response that appears to be lacking both for the Ukrainians and their allies. Our assessments have remained consistent from the outset. It's evident that the conflict continues to shift eastward, evolving into a protracted and challenging battle each passing day. Recent events in Bakhmut illustrate this reality. While the Ukrainians can provide first-hand accounts of their operations and the ongoing developments on the ground, we recognize the arduous nature of this struggle. We are confident in the Ukrainians' capabilities, equipped with the necessary firepower and resources for successful counteroffensive operations. They are currently engaged in both defensive and offensive maneuvers, and I defer to them for further details on their strategies. Regarding the spokesperson issue, there has been a deliberate shift towards employing women in such roles. This decision stems from a perception that journalists may hesitate to pose tough questions to women, fearing they may appear impolite or be labeled as displaying toxic masculinity. Additionally, this particular individual's political background, aligned with the Democratic Party for years, suggests a comfort with deception, a trait that seems prevalent in Washington's political climate. Whether she truly comprehends the situation is uncertain, but the prevalence of unabashed dishonesty seems to be a prerequisite for advancement in the current political environment, a trend that is deeply troubling. The media plays a significant role in this narrative. Let's be honest, it's predominantly influenced by individuals who are fully committed to a particular viewpoint from the outset. This conflict has been steeped in deception, and unfortunately, it appears to persist. In that vein, the ultimate victims of these falsehoods will likely be the vulnerable Ukrainian population, and any Europeans who continue to lend their support may also face dire consequences. Hopefully, we can avoid being drawn further into this quagmire, but the pattern of deceit is undeniable. The truth, as the Russians see it, will eventually come to light, and its revelation will be difficult to conceal. As for Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, I believe he graduated from West Point in the class of '80. Like Petraeus and others, he seems to have played a significant role in propagating misinformation about this conflict. In professional terms, it's difficult to regard individuals like him and Petraeus with much esteem. Their actions suggest a lack of understanding of the gravity of the situation. Labeling them as professional pygmies may seem harsh, but their suggestions risk igniting a broader and more destructive war. He fails to mention, as is often the case in the West, that President Putin has thus far exercised restraint with the Russian military. Despite having the capacity to inflict far greater damage, Putin has shown reluctance to escalate the conflict to that extent. From the outset, he's been mindful of the future coexistence with the Ukrainian people, opting to minimize unnecessary harm. However, the West has effectively cornered him, presenting him with limited options: either withdraw from Ukraine or face dire consequences. Faced with such ultimatums, Putin has been forced to persevere, achieving considerable effectiveness in his actions. Nevertheless, the full extent of Russia's military capabilities has yet to be unleashed. If the insistence remains on resisting the Russians, if we persist in living in a fantasy world and dragging the Ukrainians along this path, we'll collectively face dire consequences. And that seems to be the message. Arms are poised to advance, though the timing remains uncertain. Whether it's next week, July, or the beginning of August, they're now in a position to launch a formidable offensive. As indicated by recent maneuvers near Lyman and towards Albertreich, it's reasonable to anticipate the Russian military sweeping across eastern Ukraine and ultimately seizing Odessa. An impressing question is our course of action in the interim. Will we engage in dialogue with the Russians and establish arrangements grounded in reality and facts? Will we finally acknowledge their legitimate security concerns? It's worth noting Hodge's assertion that Ukraine will never be safe as long as Russia occupies. Conversely, from the Russian perspective, as long as Ukraine aligns with NATO or maintains a Kiev government perceived as a Washington puppet with a substantial army, their security remains in question. Neutrality seems to be the answer to addressing everyone's security needs. But the longer we delay, the greater the likelihood of Russian troops stationed at the Polish border. These are the realities we must confront. The Hedra safe offers a convenient and efficient solution. Some may even consider it a game changer. Acting as a safety net, it safeguards your belongings while keeping them discreet and secure from others, providing both security and organization. The headrest safe ensures your valuables remain within reach, yet out of sight. That's the advantage the headrest safe brings to the table regarding his perspective on Ukraine. It's not about winning or losing. Rather, it reflects his frustration with the Russian High Command's delay in launching decisive offensive operations. He believes that allowing the Ukrainians to survive this phase intact could lead to their regrouping and potentially receiving additional weapons from the West, prolonging the conflict. His stance emphasizes the need for swift and decisive action to crush what remains of the opposition, a move he sees as crucial for preserving Russian lives. Above all else, I believe that concern is lingering in the back of his mind, and others in Moscow are likely contemplating it as well. It circles back to the question of what remains once the conflict concludes. If there is a desire to negotiate an end of the war, there must be stringent conditions in place. Otherwise, there's a risk of recurring conflicts akin to what we've seen in Kosovo resurfacing in Ukraine. There's a genuine worry about the potential for the enemy to persistently resurge. He acknowledges that Ukrainians are resilient fighters. There's no denying their strength. However, the current adversaries may be among the least experienced he's encountered since the war began. Regarding the decision-making process, while it may have seemed necessary under pressure, deploying the best-trained troops is crucial. Soldiers with prior experience in combat situations bring valuable insights and a more pragmatic approach to operations. However, from the outset, the fundamental problem has been the daunting nature of breaching the defenses. Even if the United States Army were involved in significant numbers, breaking through such fortified positions would require extensive Air Force and Army capabilities deployed over months. The reality is that the Ukrainians never stood a chance of breaking through these defenses within the timelines demanded. All discipline essentially stems from habitual practices. It heavily relies on the extent and frequency of training, particularly on a scale seldom witnessed during peacetime. The goal is to ingrain a natural inclination to act rightly and sensibly. As you mentioned, someone like me, considered outdated, lacks the first-hand experience of soldiers engaged in this ongoing conflict. It's crucial to have individuals who have been actively involved in the war, as they've developed a profound understanding of Russian capabilities, including missiles, rockets, artillery, tanks, and armored vehicles. They comprehend Russian tactics, their deployment strategies, and the rationale behind them. For instance, there was a recent report about HIMAR supposedly neutralizing a Russian rocket artillery battery with Grad missiles. However, upon closer examination, there's limited evidence supporting the destruction of the battery. It appears more likely that the incident was orchestrated to provoke Ukrainian forces into expending more ammunition, thereby exposing their positions for targeting. The Russians operate with confidence, leveraging strategies that may seem unorthodox or deceitful.